All right, just to round out the Civil War here, we're going to pick back up where we left off with the Gettysburg Address. So, shortly after the Battle of Gettysburg, there are a lot of people that have died and still actually litter the battlefield at Gettysburg. And so a new cemetery has to be dedicated in order for these bodies to have a place to be put to rest. And so Lincoln is invited as a courtesy to dedicate this cemetery. And at that dedication, he actually gives one of the most famous and really one of the shortest speeches in American history, and that is the Gettysburg Address. That's the whole 70 years ago and all of that. Why is my PowerPoint not working? Ha ha, there we go. So, 70 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent, you know, that much, probably not the rest of it. But I'm not going to go through the entirety of it with you. It's short for a speech, but it's still lengthy if I just sat here and read it. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to tell you what the Gettysburg Address really talks about in summation. So the first portion of the Gettysburg Address, what does that do? So first off, it just talks about the principles that our government was founded upon in the first place. And notice here that when he says nation, he's not saying union. He's not saying just the North. He's referring to the entire United States of America, which does include the South. And also he brings forth some language that is very reminiscent of the Declaration of Independence, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. That's the Declaration of Independence right there. And that's really hinting at the South coming back as equals, and also really talking about the possibility of enslaved African Americans to also be considered equals in the government, or in the eyes of the government. Also, it talks about, in the second portion of the speech, the Civil War is a test to see if these principles will last, because other republics have fallen, have failed. So he's essentially saying this American experiment, if we don't win this war, it loses 100%. So what we need to do is ensure that we win this war, not just for ourselves, but for all future republics that will exist. Because if we can't do this, if we can't win this, then those republics are sure to fail as well. And he does not want that to happen. And lastly, the Union needs to win the Civil War to preserve our form of government, to preserve this democratic republic that we have. Because if we do not win it, then the dream is essentially dead. This isn't a war just to get the South to come back. This isn't a war just to end slavery. This is a war almost for the soul of mankind, to see if this government of the people, by the people, for the people, will actually work, will actually continue to exist, whether this is something that is just a dream or whether this is something that can be made into a reality and continue to persist. So, under Grant's leadership, the Union Army was more aggressive and committed to the South's will to destroy. The South's will to fight. Grant is going to, shortly after the Battle of Vicksburg, he's going to appoint William Tecumseh Sherman to lead a Southern campaign, essentially going through the South off the eastern seaboard and just wreaking havoc. Also, Sherman, while he is doing that, he's going to destroy every single thing he comes in contact with. It's not necessarily to massacre people, and it's not necessarily to defeat enemy soldiers. It's to destroy the economy and the infrastructure of the South during what's called his March to the Sea, which is detailed right here. He starts off in the northwestern portion of Georgia and essentially marches across all of Georgia and destroys everything they come into contact with. And there's actually an image that is shown here in just a second. I'm actually going to skip ahead to that, of what's going on with Sherman and his men. So you see here, they're not necessarily fighting enemy troops. What they're doing here is they're destroying the infrastructure of the South. They're ripping up railroad tracks so they can't transport goods, they can't transport men. They're burning down farms, they're destroying crops, they're ripping out telegraph lines out of the ground. They'll actually take these tracks and heat them up so they can wrap them around trees so the metal gets soft enough that they can really destroy these railroads so that they can't be used anymore by Southerners. Really significant, the Battle of Atlanta ends up becoming a huge victory for the Union as well, because that is a huge trade hub and a huge means for the South, because of the railroad terminus that is there to transport goods and men throughout the rest of the Confederacy. And because that's destroyed, it really hinders the South's ability to do that, to transport men and to transport goods. Lincoln does have to face a re-election in 1864. He runs under the Republican ticket once again, and he runs against General George McClellan at this point, who has been dismissed and reinstated and dismissed again by Lincoln several times during the war. So McClellan is going to run against Lincoln, and Lincoln actually does end up winning because of Sherman's march to the sea and how successful Sherman was in Atlanta. Lincoln wasn't terribly popular with the American people at this point in time. I mean, you could see the popular vote is kind of close, 55 to 45%, and this is after the March to the Sea that is done by William Sherman. So he really does secure that victory for Lincoln at that point. In Lincoln's second inaugural address, he sees the wars coming to a close, and so in his address, he actually starts to talk about his plans for Reconstruction just very briefly, with malice towards none and charity for all, addressing the fact that when the South wants to return, that he doesn't want there to be bad blood between the North and the South. He wants there to be an idea or a feeling of forgiveness of, okay, this happened, there's nothing we can do about it, but we just kind of all want to move forward. We want to kind of put this in our past and just make America great once again like it should be. So the war ends with Appomattox. Grant is going to defeat Ulysses S. Grant is going to defeat General Robert E. Lee. He's going to retreat, and the war is going to end with Lee officially surrendering at Appomattox Courthouse, and this officially ends the Civil War. Other Southern generals will follow suit shortly thereafter, and the rest of the South will fall in line. So why does the South lose? The lack of Southern resources because of this blockade. There are no more foreign goods that are coming into the South because of that, so they're really starving out, as well as the North's ability to blockade these ports to fulfill that Anaconda plan, and also because of their ability to get into the South and in any sort of advantages or advances that the South had. Shortly thereafter, April 14th, 1865, Lincoln is going to be assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. Booth's intention was to assassinate Lincoln. He had cohorts that actually were going to assassinate the vice president and also the Secretary of State. What he was trying to do was create a power vacuum within the North, giving the South the ability to rally themselves and to try and keep the war going. Unfortunately, this is, well, not unfortunately, because it's good that didn't happen, but unfortunate for John Wilkes Booth and his Southern cause, that does not end up happening. Though Lincoln is assassinated, Johnson is put in power shortly thereafter. Johnson's assassination is unsuccessful, as well as the assassination attempt on the Secretary of State. So Lincoln will actually be shot in the head and will die the next day. So what are the effects of the war on the United States? First off, tremendous loss of life. 618,000 troops end up dying. That's more than any other U.S. war up to this point in time. So the loss of life, even in this older war, is going to be tremendous because of the amount of people involved and because of all that new technology. A little bit on the good side, though. The 13th Amendment will end up being ratified in 1865, and this officially ends slavery. Slavery is no longer going to exist anywhere within the United States. This is an amendment to the Constitution, so that is the end-all be-all. That is the law of the land, so slavery is illegal. The war is going to forever end the states' rights argument. Are states supreme? Can states overrule the federal government? No. We fought a civil war over it. And it ends up being the case that no, states do not have autonomy. They cannot nullify federal law, though that is, at this point in time, up in question. The states are trying to enforce some more of their own standards and laws and ignoring some federal laws nowadays, but at the end of the day, everybody knows that the federal government is going to be supreme. And also the South is going to be really essentially destroyed. There's pictures that I'll show you during Reconstruction of southern cities and towns that have just been completely decimated. Sherman going through Georgia has completely destroyed Georgia for the most part. Atlanta has been burned to the ground. And so there has to be a plan that is put in place not only to readmit the South into the Union, but also to find out, okay, well, what do we do with the people that fought against the Union? What do we do about the fact that the South has been destroyed? How do we help rebuild? And that's what Reconstruction is really all about, figuring out what to do about all these things. So that's going to be it for the Civil War. We'll start talking about Reconstruction in the next video. And there we go. All right.